Captain Marcus Tank Rodriguez had seen some weird stuff in his 20 years of military service, but nothing quite prepared him for the sight of the Galactic Council headquarters. Picture the United Nations building, but designed by someone who clearly never heard of the concept less is more, and had access to materials that defied at least 3 laws of physics. The thing was floating, for starters, which Tank figured was just showing off. He adjusted his grip on the cat carrier and straightened his dress uniform. Inside the carrier, Mr. Whiskers, a perfectly ordinary orange tabby with white paws and an attitude problem, was doing that thing cats do where they act like traveling is a personal insult. The low, rumbling complaints coming from the carrier were already drawing stares from the various alien species milling around the entrance. And boy, what a collection they were. Tank had read the briefings, sure, but seeing a 12-foot-tall crystalline being argue with what appeared to be a walking mushroom about parking regulations was something else entirely. "Captain Rodriguez of Earth," Tank announced to the reception desk, which was operated by a creature that looked like someone had crossed an octopus with a filing cabinet. "I'm here for the emergency session regarding the mechanoid threat." The receptionist's tentacles paused over what Tank assumed was some kind of keyboard, though it looked more like abstract art, having a seizure. "Earth?" Several eye stalks turned toward him. "Oh yes, the primitive species. You're in Conference Hall Zeta 7. Try not to touch anything that glows. Or moves. Or exists, really." Tank made his way through corridors that seemed designed by M.C. Escher after a particularly creative bender, following signs in 17 different languages, none of which were remotely helpful. Mr. Whiskers had gone suspiciously quiet, which Tank knew from experience meant he was planning something. The conference hall doors slid open with a theatrical whoosh, revealing a scene that would have been impressive if it wasn't so clearly designed to intimidate. A massive circular chamber with representatives from dozens of species arranged in tiers, all of them turning to stare at the human who'd just walked in carrying a pet carrier. Chancellor Blorgon of the Xerian Empire rose from his ornate floating throne, all 4 arms gesturing dramatically. He was purple, roughly humanoid, and wore enough ceremonial jewelry to fund a small space program. "Ah, the representative from Earth arrives at last. We were beginning to think your species had already been eliminated by the mechanoids." "Not yet," Tank replied, setting the cat carrier down carefully, "though it's not for lack of trying on their part." Ambassador Prism of the Crystal Collective chimed in. Literally, her voice sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. "We have reviewed your planet's military capabilities, human. Your technology appears to be several centuries behind our own. Your weapons fire simple projectiles using chemical propellants. Quite quaint." A ripple of what Tank assumed was laughter passed through the assembly. It sounded like a zoo having a nervous breakdown. "Yeah, well, we make do," Tank said, unlatching the carrier. "And we brought our secret weapon." Mr. Whiskers emerged with the dignified air of a cat who had been personally wronged by the universe. He sat down, wrapped his tail around his paws, and surveyed the assembled aliens with the kind of judgment usually reserved for disappointing dinner service. The silence stretched for approximately 3 seconds before Chancellor Blorgon's laugh boomed across the chamber. "Your secret weapon is a small mammal?" "A domesticated carnivore, apparently," added General Tentacula from the Squid Republic, waving several arms dismissively. "Earth's military strategy involves bringing pets to war councils." Tank scratched behind Mr. Whiskers' ears, earning a brief purr. "Trust me, you haven't seen what this guy can do." "I'm sure," Ambassador Prism chimed sarcastically. "Tell us, human, how exactly does your secret weapon plan to defeat an empire of logical, calculating war machines that have conquered half the galaxy?" Tank grinned. "Well, that's the thing about cats. They don't really do logical." Chancellor Blorgon's forearms spread wide in a gesture that Tank interpreted as either diplomatic grandstanding or an attempt to hug the entire universe. "Perhaps, Captain Rodriguez, you would benefit from observing how actual civilized species conduct warfare." A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing what looked like the galaxy's most expensive fireworks show. General Tentacula's tentacles danced over a control interface, manipulating the display with the enthusiasm of someone showing off their vacation slides. "Behold," General Tentacula announced, "the Squid Republic's plasma cannon array. Each weapon generates the equivalent energy of a small star and can reduce a mechanoid dreadnought to its component atoms in 2.7 seconds. The assembled delegates murmured appreciatively. Tank nodded politely, while Mr. Whiskers began grooming his paw with the focused intensity of someone performing brain surgery. Impressive, Commander Spike of the Porcupine Federation interjected, his quills bristling with what Tank assumed was pride. But observe our temporal shield matrix. The hologram shifted to show a shimmering barrier of energy. Our shields don't just deflect attacks, they send them backward through time to before they were fired. We've been undefeated for 300 years. 312, corrected Ambassador Prism, because apparently even alien diplomats couldn't resist being that person. Though I must note that our Crystal Collective's harmonic resonance weapons can shatter molecular bonds by singing at them. We literally sing our enemies to death. And Tank whistled low. That's actually kind of terrifying. Terrifying and effective, Chancellor Blorgon declared. These are the weapons of advanced civilizations, Captain. Technologies developed over millennia of evolution and scientific progress. He gestured toward Tank's sidearm. You carry a device that accelerates small metal objects using controlled explosions. It's like bringing a sharp stick to a neutron star fight. The laughter that followed sounded like a convention of hyenas having an existential crisis. Mr. Whiskers paused in his grooming to give the entire assembly a look that could have frozen plasma. So, here's what we've decided, Chancellor Blorgon continued, his tone suggesting he was explaining basic arithmetic to a particularly dim child. The Galactic Council will provide Earth with our older military equipment, some surplus plasma rifles from about 50 years ago, a few outdated shield generators, maybe a small frigate or two from our reserve fleets. How generous, Tank said flatly. We thought so, Ambassador Prism chimed, completely missing the sarcasm. In return, Earth's forces will serve as a distraction for the mechanoids, while our real military forces execute the primary defensive strategies. General Tentacula's eyes gleamed with what Tank was learning to recognize as alien condescension. Think of it as a learning experience, human. Your species can observe how proper warfare is conducted, while contributing in whatever small way you can manage. And when the mechanoids arrive at Earth? Tank asked. Commander Spike's quills rattled. Well, naturally we expect Earth to fall, but your resistance should buy us valuable time to prepare our real defenses. Every primitive species that throws themselves at the mechanoids gives us more data on their tactical patterns. Tank felt his jaw clench. Mr. Whiskers, as if sensing his human's mood, stood up and stretched with the languid grace of someone who had just decided that everything in the vicinity was beneath his notice. Right, Tank said slowly. So we're cannon fodder. Such an ugly term, Chancellor Blorgon said, waving a dismissive hand. Prefer to think of it as an honored sacrifice for the greater galactic good. The assembled aliens nodded sagely, apparently having convinced themselves that throwing humanity to the wolves was actually a humanitarian gesture. Tank picked up Mr. Whiskers, who settled into his arms with a soft purr. Well then, I guess we'd better get back to Earth and prepare for our honored sacrifice. Excellent attitude, General Tentacula beamed. Though I do hope you'll leave your pet here. The council stations have excellent veterinary facilities, and it would be cruel to subject such a primitive creature to the horrors of war. Mr. Whiskers opened one green eye and stared at General Tentacula with the expression of someone who had just been deeply, personally insulted. Thanks for the offer, Tank said, scratching behind the cat's ears. But Mr. Whiskers goes where I go. Besides, you said it yourself. He's just a primitive creature. What harm could he possibly do? The aliens exchanged knowing looks, clearly filing this under touching human sentimentally and why primitive species go extinct. Tank headed for the door, but paused at the threshold. Just one question, though. In all your advanced civilizations, with all your incredible technology and superior strategies, how many of you have actually managed to stop the mechanoids? The silence that followed was the kind of quiet you get when someone asks exactly the right question at exactly the wrong time. We'll be in touch, Tank said cheerfully, and walked out with Mr. Whiskers purring against his chest. Back on Earth, Tank stood in the middle of what used to be Central Park, watching the most bizarre military operation in human history unfold around him. Mr. Whiskers sat in his lap, occasionally batting at the holographic display Tank was using to coordinate the global defense effort. Status report, Tank said into his comm unit. Sir, London reports cardboard box installations complete, came the crisp voice of Lieutenant Parker. They're asking if the boxes need to be specific dimensions. Tank scratched Mr. Whiskers behind the ears. Tell them it doesn't matter. Cats aren't picky about box specifications. 3 light-years away, aboard the Galactic Council monitoring station, Ambassador Prism was having what could only be described as a crystalline headache. She watched the tactical display showing Earth's defensive preparations with the kind of confusion usually reserved for advanced mathematics or alien tax codes. Are they placing small metallic spheres randomly throughout their cities? She chimed to General Tentacula, who was floating nearby looking equally perplexed. It appears so, the squid replied, tentacles writhing in confusion. And they're installing some kind of primitive audio devices. Very small ones that produce high-frequency sounds when disturbed. Chancellor Blorgon materialized on the bridge, having teleported in from his home system. Status on the human preparations? Incomprehensible, Commander Spike reported, his quills drooping with bewilderment. They appear to be scattering what our sensors indicate are small explosive devices throughout their urban areas, but in no discernible pattern. It's as if they're placing them wherever they feel like it. Back on Earth, Tank was walking through downtown Manhattan, watching teams of humans carefully placing what looked like ordinary ball bearings on every available horizontal surface. Windowsills, building ledges, park benches, trash can lids. Anywhere something small and round could sit precariously. Make sure they're not secured, Tank called out to one of the teams. We want them to fall off easily. The alien observers recorded this with growing confusion. Additionally, Ambassador Prism noted, her voice reaching frequencies that could shatter glass, they appear to be constructing elaborate fortifications from folded organic material. She was referring to the massive cardboard box cities that were springing up in every major metropolitan area. To the aliens, monitoring through their advanced sensors, these appeared to be sophisticated defensive structures. Their equipment detected the corrugated construction as some kind of advanced composite material with unusual acoustic properties. They couldn't have been more wrong. Team Leader Martinez, Tank radioed to Mexico City. How's Operation Catnip going? Our plants are in position, Captain, came the reply. We've got laser pointers installed on every major building, keyed to activate when they detect metallic movement. The cats are, well, they're very interested in the preparations, sir. That was an understatement. Across Earth, cats were displaying behavior that would have concerned veterinarians if the vets hadn't been too busy helping with the war effort. Millions of domestic cats were positioning themselves strategically throughout the cardboard cities, their pupils dilated with what appeared to be pure anticipation. Mr. Whiskers stood up in Tank's lap and stared at the horizon with the focused intensity of a predator who had just spotted prey. His tail twitched once, twice, then went perfectly still. Aboard the monitoring station, the aliens watched their screens with growing alarm, not because Earth's defenses looked effective, quite the opposite. The humans appeared to be preparing for war, using what could generously be described as a particularly chaotic arts and crafts project. The projectile weapons are stationed seemingly at random, General Tentacula observed, waving several arms at the display. Some are pointed at the sky, some at buildings, some appear to be aimed at small domestic animals. The small domestic animals are everywhere, Commander Spike added, his voice filled with the kind of concern usually reserved for natural disasters. They're not seeking shelter. They're positioning themselves, almost like they're part of the defense plan. Chancellor Blorgon studied the readings with 4 sets of eyes, each one more confused than the last. Perhaps this is how primitive species face extinction. With interpretive warfare. What the aliens couldn't understand, what their sophisticated sensors and advanced algorithms failed to grasp, was that they were witnessing the deployment of the most chaotic force in the known universe. Cats with a plan. Well, not exactly a plan. Cats don't really do plans. But cats do have instincts, and right now, every cat on Earth was feeling the same instinct. Something very interesting was about to happen, and they intended to be part of it. Tank stood up, Mr. Whiskers jumping gracefully to the ground. All teams, final positions, he announced. Operation Absolute Chaos is a go. Remember, people, we're not trying to make sense, we're trying to make trouble. In orbit, the alien observers exchanged what could only be described as interstellar shrugs. Well, Ambassador Prism chimed sadly, at least they'll provide an interesting footnote in the history of galactic warfare. If only she knew. The Mechanoid Empire's arrival was, in typical machine fashion, precisely on schedule. At exactly 600 hours Galactic Standard Time, the first wave of their ships materialized at the edge of Earth's solar system, like geometric thunderclouds made of chrome and malice. Tank stood on the observation deck of the hastily converted NORAD facility, Mr. Whiskers perched on his shoulder, like the world's most nonchalant parrot. The cat was watching the massive displays with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for suspicious cardboard boxes. Or that one spot on the wall that definitely had something behind it. "Contact established," announced Major Williams from the communications station. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies." The transmission crackled to life, and a voice that sounded like someone had taught a calculator to be condescending filled the room. "Biological entities of the third planet, you will surrender unconditionally. Resistance is futile. Your species will be processed according to Mechanoid Protocol 77 Alpha. Compliance ensures minimal suffering during recycling procedures." Tank keyed his microphone. "This is Captain Rodriguez representing Earth. Thanks for the offer, but we'll have to pass on the whole recycling thing." A pause. Then, "Your response is not recognized as valid surrender protocol. Initiating standard pacification procedures." Mr. Whisker's ears twitched. Somewhere deep in his cat brain, ancient hunting instincts were stirring. The mechanoid fleet moved with the terrifying precision of a Swiss watch having an existential crisis. Each ship held perfect formation, their weapons powered up in synchronized harmony, their targeting computers already calculating optimal bombardment patterns. It was beautiful, efficient, and absolutely logical, which, as any cat owner could have told them, was their first mistake. 3 systems over, the Galactic Council was learning this lesson the hard way. General Tentacula's flagship, the Pride of Calamari, was locked in what could generously be called a battle, and more accurately described as an expensive fireworks show that ended badly. "Plasma cannons at maximum power," Tentacula bellowed, his tentacles flying over the controls. The ship's main batteries opened fire, sending streams of superheated plasma toward the approaching mechanoid dreadnought. The energy beams struck the enemy shields and dissipated harmlessly, absorbed by defensive systems that had been calculated to withstand exactly this type of attack. "The shields are adapting to our weapons' signatures," reported the tactical officer, a squid with a particularly nervous disposition. "They're analyzing our plasma frequency and adjusting their defensive matrix in real time." "Impossible," Tentacula roared. "Our plasma technology is the most advanced in the galaxy." The mechanoid dreadnought's response was swift and devastating. A single, precisely aimed energy beam punched through the Pride of Calamari's shields like they were made of tissue paper, disabling the ship's main engines and leaving it dead in space. Similar scenes were playing out across the battle zone. Commander Spike's temporal shields, the pride of the Porcupine Federation, lasted exactly 37 seconds against mechanoid weapons that had been specifically designed to counter time manipulation technology. The shields didn't just fail, they collapsed backward, through their own timeline, taking half the ship's defensive systems with them. "They've studied our tactics," Spike transmitted to the remaining fleet as his ship listed helplessly to port. "Every weapon, every defense, every strategy we've used, they've calculated countermeasures for all of it." Ambassador Prism's harmonic resonance weapons fared no better. The Crystal Collective's battle hymns, capable of shattering molecular bonds through pure sonic manipulation, met mechanoid hulls equipped with adaptive acoustic dampeners. The war songs that had toppled empires now sounded like someone gargling in a library. "How is this possible?" Prism chimed in frequencies that expressed both terror and confusion. "We're using weapons they've never encountered before." The answer came from Chancellor Blorgon, whose ornate command ship was currently missing 2 of its 4 engine pods. "They're not reacting to new weapons, they're predicting them. Every tactic we use, every innovation we deploy, they've already calculated the logical response." Back in Earth orbit, the mechanoid fleet was arranging itself with the geometric precision of a Death Star having a tea party. Their battle computers had analyzed Earth's defensive capabilities, cataloged the primitive projectile weapons, noted the unusual distribution of small explosive devices, and calculated the optimal approach pattern for planetary subjugation. Tank watched the enemy formations through his binoculars, occasionally sharing them with Mr. Whiskers, who sniffed at the eyepieces with professional interest. "Sir," Major Williams called out, "long-range sensors are picking up the mechanoid ground assault ships. They're beginning atmospheric entry over major population centers." "All according to their playbook," Tank murmured, scratching behind Mr. Whisker's ears. "Logical, efficient, predictable." The first mechanoid assault craft descended through Earth's atmosphere like metallic rain, their heat shields glowing cherry red as they approached landing zones that had been calculated for maximum strategic impact. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow. Every major city would be simultaneously attacked, overwhelming any coordinated defense. At least, that was the plan. The lead assault craft touched down in Central Park with the precision of a surgeon and the subtlety of a meteor. Its landing thrusters scorched perfect circles in the grass, and its boarding ramps extended with mechanical precision. Rows of mechanoid infantry marched out in perfect formation, their optical sensors sweeping the area for targets. What they found was a cardboard box. A large cardboard box, sitting innocuously near what had once been the Alice in Wonderland statue. The mechanoid unit commander paused, its advanced targeting computer attempting to classify the object. Unknown organic composite structure, hollow construction, no evident weapons systems. Threat level, minimal. The commander stepped forward, raising its energy weapon to dispose of this minor obstacle. That's when Mr. Whiskers struck. Well, not Mr. Whiskers specifically, he was still on Tank's shoulder, watching the proceedings with the satisfied air of a conductor about to begin a symphony. But his cousin Fluffy, a gray tabby with commitment issues and a tendency toward dramatic entrances, exploded out of the cardboard box like a furry missile with a grudge. The mechanoid commander's threat assessment system immediately went haywire. The object had been classified as inanimate. Inanimate objects do not suddenly develop claws and launch themselves at optical sensors while yowling battle cries that sound like the universe being unzipped. Across the city, similar scenes were unfolding. Every cardboard box that the aliens had assumed was part of some primitive fortification system turned out to be occupied by a cat, and every cat had apparently decided that today was the day to express their feelings about uninvited guests. The mechanoids' perfectly calculated landing zones became scenes of absolute chaos as thousands of cats emerged from their hiding spots with the focused intensity of small furry tornadoes. Their battle computers, designed to predict logical military responses, found themselves trying to calculate the tactical implications of a tabby named Princess, who had just knocked over 3 mechanoid infantry units while chasing what appeared to be a small red dot. "Status report," Tank said into his comm, trying to keep the smile out of his voice. "Sir, the mechanoids have landed in all major cities," came the reply from Lieutenant Parker, "and sir, I think our secret weapons are working." Through his binoculars, Tank could see mechanoid forces in Central Park standing in perfect formation, weapons raised, completely unable to move forward because their path was blocked by a orange tomcat, who had claimed a small cardboard box and was defending it with the righteous fury of someone whose personal space had been violated. The Tom, Tank thought it might be Mr. Whiskers' neighbor Garfield, was demonstrating the ancient feline art of making himself look 3 times larger while producing sounds that suggested the apocalypse was personally offended. The mechanoid unit stood there, their threat assessment systems spinning uselessly, trying to calculate whether a 10-pound mammal constituted a significant military obstacle. Meanwhile, in space, the alien observers watched their screens with growing horror as their tactical displays showed the impossible. The mechanoids weren't advancing. The most efficient war machine in galactic history had apparently been stopped by what appeared to be a citywide outbreak of small domestic animals having strong opinions. "This is impossible," Chancellor Blorgon transmitted from his damaged ship. "Nothing stops the mechanoids. They adapt to every strategy, counter every weapon, predict every tactic." Tank keyed his communicator to the Galactic Council frequency. "Well, there's your problem right there. You're thinking like soldiers. The cats, well, they're not really thinking at all. They're just being cats." As if to punctuate his point, Mr. Whiskers chose that moment to stretch, yawn, and knock Tank's coffee mug off the console with his tail. The mug shattered on the floor, and somewhere in Central Park a mechanoid unit commander tried to factor random liquid dispersal event into its tactical calculations, and experienced what could only be described as a robot migraine. What happened next could only be understood if you've ever watched a cat suddenly decide that everything in a room needs to be on the floor instead of where it currently is, and then multiply that by roughly 4 billion. It started with the ball bearings. In downtown Tokyo, a sleek black cat named Yuki was perched on a 3rd-story window ledge, watching a mechanoid patrol march down the street below with the mechanical precision of a really boring parade. The patrol had been calculated to avoid all known defensive positions, follow optimal routes for rapid city pacification, and maintain perfect formation while doing it. What the mechanoids hadn't calculated was Yuki's relationship with gravity and small round objects. She batted the first ball bearing off the ledge with the casual indifference of someone who had never heard of consequences. The tiny metal sphere arced gracefully through the air and struck the lead mechanoid directly on its primary optical sensor. Now, to be fair, a ball bearing poses about as much threat to a mechanoid warrior as a soap bubble poses to a tank. But here's the thing about artificial intelligence. It really, really doesn't like variables it can't account for. The lead mechanoid stopped, its head swiveling upward to identify the source of the projectile. Its threat assessment system immediately began calculating trajectory, velocity, and probable launch mechanism. Conclusion: unknown weapons platform detected. Initiating defensive countermeasures. Which was exactly when Yuki knocked the second ball bearing off the ledge. And the third. And the fourth, because honestly, this was the most interesting thing that had happened all week. The mechanoid unit began taking evasive action against what their computers had classified as a sustained precision artillery attack. They scattered, seeking cover, their formations dissolving as they tried to avoid the rain of tiny metal spheres that was now falling from multiple windows as other cats joined in what was clearly becoming the best game ever invented. In London, the situation was escalating exponentially. A ginger Tom named Biscuits had discovered that the strange red dots appearing on buildings whenever the metal men walked by were absolutely, positively, definitely something that needed to be caught immediately. The fact that these red dots were actually targeting lasers from mechanoid weapon systems was irrelevant to Biscuits. What mattered was that they moved, they were red, and therefore they required his immediate and aggressive attention. Biscuit launched himself at the nearest laser dot with the focused determination of a guided missile, colliding mid-air with the mechanoid soldier who was using the targeting system. The impact sent both cat and robot tumbling in a tangle of fur, metal, and indignant yowling. The mechanoid's weapon system, now pointed randomly skyward, discharged accidentally, sending an energy beam streaking upward where it struck one of the Empire's own assault ships. The ship, not expecting friendly fire from a ground unit, interpreted this as an attack from an unknown Earth defense system and began evasive maneuvers. This drew the attention of 17 other cats who had been lounging on various rooftops, all of whom saw the ship's movement and immediately classified it as something that needed to be stalked. Meanwhile, in New York's Central Park, the original confrontation between Garfield and the mechanoid unit had evolved into something that defied both military doctrine and the laws of physics. Garfield had discovered that if he sat in his cardboard box and made eye contact with the lead mechanoid, the robot would stop moving entirely. Every time the unit tried to advance, Garfield would shift positions slightly, maintaining what animal behaviorists recognize as the classic predator stare, and what the mechanoid computers were desperately trying to classify as some form of advanced psychological warfare. The mechanoid commander's threat assessment was now cycling through possibilities at light speed. Unknown staring weapon, possible hypnotic attack, initiating, mental shielding protocols. But every time the mechanoids adjusted their position to avoid the staring weapon, Garfield would simply turn his head and resume eye contact, as if he had all day to spend making robots uncomfortable, which, being a cat, he absolutely did. The situation reached critical mass when Mr. Whiskers himself finally decided it was time to get involved. Tank felt the shift immediately. One moment Mr. Whiskers had been a warm, purring weight on his shoulder. The next, the cat had gone perfectly still, his pupils dilating to those perfect black circles that every cat owner recognizes as the "I have seen prey and nothing else in the universe matters" look. "Oh," Tank said quietly, "here we go." Mr. Whiskers spotted his target, a small red laser dot dancing across the wall of the observation deck. It was actually a reflection from one of the mechanoid ships in orbit, their targeting computers attempting to scan the NORAD facility. To the mechanoids, it was standard reconnaissance protocol. To Mr. Whiskers, it was game on. He launched himself from Tank's shoulder with the grace of a ballet dancer and the focused intensity of a heat-seeking missile. The laser dot, controlled by a computer system millions of times more sophisticated than any Earth technology, began moving erratically as Mr. Whiskers chased it across walls, over consoles, and through holographic displays. What the mechanoid targeting computer interpreted as successful evasion of an unknown intercept system was actually just a cat having the time of his life. But computers, even very smart ones, don't really understand the concept of fun. The orbital targeting system began implementing increasingly complex evasive patterns, trying to shake what it had classified as Earth's most advanced defensive interceptor. The laser dot zigzagged, spiraled, and traced elaborate geometric patterns across the facility. Mr. Whiskers followed every movement with the single-minded determination of someone who had never met a red dot he couldn't catch. He bounced off walls, ricocheted off ceiling panels, and performed aerial maneuvers that would have impressed a fighter pilot. The mechanoid targeting computer, now convinced it was engaged in combat with a weapon system beyond its understanding, began broadcasting an emergency alert to the entire fleet. Unknown Earth defense system demonstrates unprecedented maneuverability and persistence. Unable to achieve target lock. Recommend immediate tactical reassessment. This alert coincided with similar reports flooding in from every landing zone on Earth. In Moscow, a Siberian cat named Dmitri had discovered that mechanoid armor made excellent scratching posts. In Sydney, a tabby called Sheila had claimed a mechanoid transport vehicle as her personal territory and was defending it with the fury of someone whose property rights had been violated. In Cairo, 3 cats had surrounded a mechanoid squad and were taking turns knocking small objects off a nearby table, apparently just to watch the robots' heads swivel back and forth like the world's most confused tennis match. But the coup de grace came when the laser pointers activated. Tank had positioned them throughout every major city, programmed to automatically track metallic movement. As thousands of mechanoids spread throughout urban areas, thousands of laser pointers came online simultaneously. The result was beyond Tank's wildest expectations. Every cat in every city suddenly had a personal red dot to chase. Not just one red dot, dozens of them, crisscrossing streets and buildings in patterns that no sane person would ever attempt to follow, but that cats found absolutely irresistible. In downtown Manhattan, a calico named Princess abandoned her cardboard-boxed fortress and began an elaborate pursuit of 3 separate laser dots, leaping between fire escapes and scaling building facades with the fluid grace of someone who had been training for this moment her entire life. The mechanoid unit that had been attempting to secure the area found themselves caught in the crossfire, as Princess ricocheted off their armor plates while chasing her laser dots, leaving them stumbling around like bowling pins in a cosmic game they didn't understand. In Tokyo, Yuki had recruited 7 other cats into what appeared to be a coordinated assault on a mechanoid command vehicle. What was actually happening was that all 8 cats had noticed the same cluster of laser dots converging on the vehicle and had decided that this was obviously a group hunting expedition. The mechanoids, surrounded by cats approaching from multiple angles with tactical precision, assumed they were facing Earth's elite special forces. The command vehicle's defensive systems activated, but this only made things worse. Energy shields designed to deflect plasma cannons and particle beams created fascinating light patterns that dozens more cats found absolutely mesmerizing. Within minutes, the entire city block had become a swirling mass of cats, chasing lights, mechanoids trying to avoid cats, and increasingly frantic robot communication traffic. But it was in London where the true masterpiece unfolded. Biscuits had apparently decided that his success with the first mechanoid meant he was now the official greeter for all visiting robots. As each new mechanoid unit entered his territory, Biscuit would appear from seemingly nowhere, execute a perfect pounce onto the lead robot, and then ride it like the world's most indignant mechanical bull while howling what could only be interpreted as either a war cry or a very angry greeting song. The mechanoids, designed to respond to logical threats, found themselves completely unprepared for an adversary whose primary tactical doctrine appeared to be affectionate violence. Every time they tried to remove Biscuits from their leader, he would simply leap to a different robot, treating the entire squad as an elaborate jungle gym designed specifically for his entertainment. Their attempts to use their energy weapons only made things worse. The bright flashes attracted more cats, who arrived convinced that someone was throwing the most spectacular laser light show in galactic history, and they definitely needed to be part of it. Within an hour of the initial landings, every mechanoid unit on Earth was reporting the same status. Mission objectives indefinitely delayed due to unknown defensive countermeasures of unprecedented effectiveness. Tank watched the global situation reports with growing amazement, and Mr. Whiskers purring on his lap, apparently exhausted from his battle with the laser dot. "Sir," Major Williams reported, "we're receiving communications from the mechanoid fleet. They're requesting clarification on our defensive systems." Tank keyed his microphone. "This is Captain Rodriguez. What can I clarify for you?" The response came in that same mechanical voice, but with what Tank could swear was a note of confusion. "Your defensive systems appear to be small quadrupedal mammals engaging in recreational activities. This does not conform to known military doctrine. Please explain tactical purpose of recreational defensive systems." Tank looked down at Mr. Whiskers, who opened one green eye and gave him a look that clearly said, "Did you really think it would be more complicated than this?" "Well," Tank replied, "the thing is, they're not really defensive systems. They're just cats. And cats pretty much do whatever they want, whenever they want to do it. Today, they wanted to play with you." The silence from the mechanoid fleet stretched for nearly a full minute. Finally, "This is not optimal." Tank grinned. "Yeah, that's kind of the point." The mechanoid empire's retreat began not with a dramatic battle cry or a heroic last stand, but with a single transmission that would go down in galactic history as the most anticlimactic surrender ever recorded. "This unit cannot compute optimal response to recreational defensive systems. Requesting immediate tactical support for For small mammal situation. Tank was still grinning when the first reports started flooding in from across the globe. In Moscow, the mechanoid forces had attempted to establish a command post in Red Square, only to discover that Dmitri the Siberian cat had claimed the entire area as his personal litterbox territory. The sight of a massive robot army being held at bay by a single fluffy cat who kept hissing at anyone who got too close to his square was being broadcast live on every remaining news network in the city. "Sir," Lieutenant Parker's voice crackled over the comm. "London reports the mechanoids are requesting safe passage to evacuate their forces. Apparently, Biscuits has recruited a gang of street cats and they're treating the invasion force like the world's most elaborate cat toy." In the observation deck, Mr. Whiskers had claimed Tank's chair and was watching the global tactical display with the satisfied air of a general reviewing a successful campaign. Occasionally, he would bat at the holographic icons representing mechanoid units, causing them to flicker and giving Tank the distinct impression that even his cat understood exactly what was happening. The mechanoid fleet commander's next transmission carried a tone that Tank had never heard from an artificial intelligence before. Desperation. "Captain Rodriguez," the mechanical voice said, "we require immediate clarification. Our tactical computers indicate your defensive systems consist entirely of small mammals engaging in recreational behavior. This cannot be accurate." Tank scratched behind Mr. Whiskers' ears, earning a rumbling purr that somehow managed to sound smug. "Oh, it's accurate. The thing is, you've been trying to fight a logical war against an enemy that doesn't understand logic." 3 systems away, the Galactic Council monitoring station was experiencing what could only be described as collective shock. Ambassador Prism's crystalline form was flickering through colors that didn't exist in most species' visible spectrum, while General Tentacula had wrapped himself in so many of his own tentacles that he looked like the galaxy's most confused pretzel. "They're retreating," Chancellor Blorgon announced, his forearms gesturing at the displays with movements that suggested he was trying to convince himself this was actually happening. "The mechanoid empire, the most efficient war machine in galactic history, is retreating from a planet defended by small domesticated carnivores." Commander Spike's quills were vibrating at frequencies that were making nearby equipment malfunction. "This is impossible. We've fought the mechanoids for decades. We've thrown our most advanced weapons at them, our greatest strategic minds, our most sophisticated technologies, and they defeat us every time because they can predict everything we do." "But they can't predict cats," Ambassador Prism chimed, her voice reaching frequencies that expressed both wonder and existential confusion. "Because cats don't follow any predictable patterns. They're agents of pure random chaos." Back on Earth, that chaos was reaching artistic levels. In Tokyo, Yuki had apparently decided that the mechanoid retreat needed a proper send-off, and had organized what could only be described as a citywide feline farewell parade. Hundreds of cats had positioned themselves on rooftops and fire escapes, watching the robot army march toward their evacuation ships, while occasionally knocking small objects at them, in what appeared to be either a gesture of farewell or a final assertion of territorial dominance. The mechanoid forces, for their part, were moving with a haste that their programming had never accounted for. Their orderly retreat formations kept dissolving whenever a cat appeared in their path, forcing them to navigate around creatures who seemed determined to sit in exactly the spots the robots needed to occupy. In Central Park, the final confrontation between Garfield and the mechanoid unit had evolved into something resembling interpretive art. The Orange Tom had apparently decided that the retreating robots needed to understand the full extent of his disapproval with their visit. He followed the unit to their extraction point, maintaining eye contact with their commander while performing what Tank could only describe as aggressive loafing, sitting in a perfect cat loaf position while radiating the kind of judgment usually reserved for disappointing human behavior. The mechanoid commander, still trying to process this sustained staring attack, transmitted a final status report. "Unknown psychological warfare technique remains active. Recommend immediate evacuation to prevent further exposure to advanced Earth mind control systems." Tank keyed his comm to the global frequency. "All units, this is Rodriguez. The mechanoids are withdrawing to their ships. Let them go, but keep the cats on standby just in case they decide to come back." The response from every major city was essentially the same. The cats had no intention of standing down. They had discovered the most entertaining invaders in galactic history, and many of them seemed genuinely disappointed that the fun was ending so soon. Mr. Whiskers chose that moment to demonstrate his own feelings about the situation by knocking Tank's coffee cup off the console again. This time, Tank was ready for it. "Yeah, I know, buddy. You're right. We should probably go explain this to the Galactic Council." The journey back to the council headquarters took place in a very different atmosphere than Tank's first visit. This time, the alien species who had dismissed humanity as primitive cannon fodder were waiting for him, with the kind of desperate attention usually reserved for miracle cures and lottery numbers. The conference hall was packed beyond capacity. Representatives from species Tank had never heard of occupied every available space, and several had apparently teleported in from across the galaxy just to witness this moment. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to handle dozens of different languages, all asking variations of the same question. How? Tank walked in carrying Mr. Whiskers in his arms rather than the carrier, and the sight of the orange tabby caused a ripple of what could only be described as reverent terror to pass through the assembly. Chancellor Blorgon rose from his floating throne, all four arms extended in what Tank assumed was either a gesture of surrender or an attempt at a hug. "Captain Rodriguez, the savior of the galaxy, please! You must tell us. How did you discover the secret to defeating the mechanoids?" Tank found himself in the unusual position of being the center of attention, in a room full of beings who had previously considered him barely worthy of notice. He set Mr. Whiskers down on the speaking platform, and the cat immediately began investigating the various alien technologies with the focused curiosity of someone considering whether they were worth knocking over. "Well," Tank said, "it wasn't really a secret, it was just cats being cats." General Tentaculous tentacles writhed with confusion. "But surely, there must be more to it. Some advanced strategy, some hidden technology. You cannot tell us that the most feared war machine in galactic history was defeated by pets." Mr. Whiskers, apparently feeling that the conversation wasn't sufficiently about him, walked over to Chancellor Blorgon's ceremonial staff and gave it an experimental sniff. The staff, an ancient artifact containing crystals from 17 different star systems, wobbled precariously. "The thing you have to understand," Tank continued, "is that the mechanoids base all their tactics on prediction and logic. They study their enemies, analyze their behavior patterns, and develop countermeasures for every possible strategy. It's incredibly effective against any opponent who follows predictable patterns." Ambassador Prism chimed in at frequencies that suggested she was beginning to understand something profound and terrifying. "But cats don't follow predictable patterns." "Exactly," Tank said. "Cats follow cat logic, which isn't really logic at all. It's impulse, curiosity, territorial instinct, and a healthy dose of I do what I want because I'm a cat. You can't predict what a cat will do, because cats don't always know what they're going to do until they do it." To demonstrate this point, Mr. Whiskers chose that exact moment to bat Chancellor Blorgon's staff off its ceremonial stand. The ancient artifact hit the floor with a crystalline chime that resonated through 17 dimensions, and Mr. Whiskers immediately pounced on it like it had personally insulted his ancestors. The assembled aliens watched in fascination and horror as one of the most revered objects in galactic civilization became a cat toy. "And that," Tank said, gesturing at the scene, "is why the mechanoids retreated. They couldn't compute a tactical response to an army of creatures who might decide at any moment to chase a laser dot off a cliff, or knock over a priceless artifact, or just sit in a box and stare at you until you questioned your life choices." Commander Spike's quills drooped as understanding dawned. "So the secret weapon wasn't technology or strategy, it was chaos itself." "Controlled chaos," Tank corrected. "See, humans figured out a long time ago that you can't control cats, but you can aim them, point them in the right direction, give them interesting things to play with, and then just let them be cats. The mechanoids never stood a chance." Mr. Whiskers, having thoroughly defeated the ceremonial staff, sat back on his haunches and began grooming his paw with the air of someone who had just completed an important task. Several alien delegates took notes. The silence that followed was broken by Chancellor Blorgon, whose voice carried a note of desperate hope. "Captain Rodriguez, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I must ask, would humanity be willing to share this cat-based defense technology with the rest of the galaxy?" Tank looked down at Mr. Whiskers, who paused in his grooming to give him a look that clearly said, "This should be interesting." "Well," Tank said slowly, "the thing about cats is that they don't really work for anyone. You don't own a cat. At best, you have a mutually beneficial arrangement, where you provide food and shelter in exchange for the occasional display of affection and the privilege of cleaning up after them." The alien delegates leaned forward eagerly, pulling out recording devices and taking frantic notes. "What?" Tank continued. "I suppose we could arrange for some cultural exchanges, maybe set up a few adoption programs. Fair warning, though, cats require a lot of maintenance. They'll knock over anything that isn't nailed down, and they have very strong opinions about everything. Also, they shed. Ambassador Prism's crystalline form brightened with what Tank assumed was excitement. We accept these terms. When can we begin the adoption process? Mr. Whiskers looked up from his grooming and surveyed the assembled alien delegates with the calculating gaze of someone assessing potential staff members. His tail twitched once, and Tank could swear he saw the cat's smile. "I'll have our people call your people," Tank said. "But remember, you're not getting weapons or soldiers. You're getting cats, and cats have their own agenda." As if to emphasize the point, Mr. Whiskers stood up, stretched, and promptly knocked over a holographic display showing the current galactic political situation. The projection flickered and died, leaving the chamber in sudden darkness. In the silence that followed, Tank heard the unmistakable sound of Mr. Whiskers purring. "Welcome to the galaxy, Earth," Chancellor Blorgon said in the darkness, his voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and what Tank suspected was growing concern about what he'd just gotten his species into. "Thanks," Tank replied, scooping up Mr. Whiskers. "Just remember, you asked for this." As the lights came back on, revealing several alien delegates cautiously approaching the ceremonial staff that Mr. Whiskers had claimed as tribute, Tank couldn't help but smile. The galaxy's greatest military minds had spent decades trying to defeat the mechanoids with logic, strategy, and advanced technology. All it took was cats being cats. Somewhere in the distance, Tank could swear he heard the sound of 4 billion cats purring in unison, a sound that seemed to say, "Finally, the universe is paying attention to us." And honestly, Tank thought as Mr. Whiskers settled into his arms with a satisfied purr, it was about time.